In this episode of Defender Rescue, we're going to focus in on taking a look at the chassis and how important it is to evaluate this before you begin any project or before you buy any Defender. If the chassis is rotted or rusted out or has structural problems, it's going to become a very expensive repair. In this video, we're going to focus in on why the chassis are usually problematic, how they rust out, and how you can evaluate a chassis to see if it's going to become a good candidate. In this case, this is a project that we took apart a couple weeks ago, and I recorded some footage because I was fascinated about the amount of dirt that was stuck in this chassis in every single nook and cranny. Technically, this probably should not have made it through customs, but we got lucky on it, and during the kind of disassembly process, we take everything off, the body, the doors, the panels, the sills, and we give the project a good analysis. And the results for us were pretty good on this one, despite being dirty. In areas like this, usually when they pile up with mud, if they haven't been steam cleaned or if they haven't been power washed out, all that collects and the moisture sticks in these areas, and this is the seat box that you can't really see from the exterior, and it's really hard to get to. A few people will take photos of them, they're selling them online, but this is an area that's really difficult to repair. It requires the tub come off, and in this case we lucked out and it's in exceptional condition. This project had quite a bit of different variety of mud and dirt on it, so it's obviously lived a pretty active life. One of the major areas to look for in a Defender is the rear crossmember, or in America, the bumper area, the rear. Because the problem is that the mud and dirt just gets stuck up in there in the little grooves and the little channels, and it's difficult to get out. And almost all Defenders at some point in time will need a new rear crossmember if it's the original chassis. On this one, you can see in the video here, we're going to focus in on some of the areas where there was at one point in time a really good, whether or not it was a factory seal or relatively early on in its life, a chassis protection. And as you sort of scrape it off or as it chips off, you can see the original factory paint underneath there. And so this is always a really positive sign, because it means that there's not some surface rust, there's not surface corrosion, and then it's going to be protected metal behind there. And so don't be afraid to, either if somebody's looking at a Defender for you or if you're looking at it yourself, to get in there and hammer away. You're not going to do any damage with a screwdriver or a little hammer, but what you will do is kind of save your wallet with future repairs. All of these pieces can be bought aftermarket and welded in, but the less work that you have to do on these areas, the more you can focus in on things like the bulkhead. In this case, this is the reason why I don't like carpet. It just holds the moisture behind there. This is very repairable, and this is pretty typical of a Defender that's had carpet, that's had moisture. And even though this one was from southern Spain, it suffers just like any one of them. So it's a repairable panel or replacement of the bulkhead. Now, as we go around the other side of the vehicle, you'll see it's in equally good shape. Sometimes Defenders, depending where they're parked or what side of the road they're driven on, one side could be worse than the other, so make sure that you're checking them all. So all the outriggers are in good shape. I'm peeling back some of this because we're going to eventually strip all this off of there anyway, so now is a good time for us to sort of evaluate the condition to see. Sometimes, people put on chassis treatment and they just cover things, or they'll go over mud like this. We see it all the time with people that have bought vehicles off of eBay or online marketplaces like Facebook, and people have made them look really nice for photos, but in the end of the day, they're just gaping holes where all of this mud and dirt is. As we peel this stuff away and get that out, we find a lot of little rocks and pebbles and stuff, but being that it was in a dry climate of southern Spain, we lucked out. So aside from some cosmetic issues that we're going to have to solve with this rear crossmember where it has rusted a little bit, and there was a little bit of a fender bender, we're going to just repair kind of that last small section of the crossmember, make it like new. And all those panels are available aftermarket, and we've got a pretty master fabrication team that takes care of that. When I was younger, I used to backpack around the world, and every beach or river that I stopped at, I would gather some sand in a little baggie, and I'd bring it back with me, and I've got little jars around my house at that. And so now the benefit of having all these Defenders coming from around the world is that we get to collect sand for each project and kind of keep a sample from each one. Now, it's not always possible to pull the entire body off a Defender to evaluate the chassis. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take it outside, clean it off, and show you a couple of different areas to look at for potential damage, and then also kind of like show you the different components of the chassis so you can have a better perspective for when you are looking at one that's assembled. We're not sponsored by Seafoam's Deep Creep, but we use so much of it at the shop, and it's one of those best tools in the toolkit type of deal. So if you're taking apart a vehicle or you're doing any maintenance whatsoever, get this. It smells good and it works amazing. Spray it on the bolts, walk away for a little bit, come back, and they'll just come straight off like a normal uncorroded bolt, mostly. This is one of my favorite parts of the project. It's we call it the driving bulkhead. It's really silly and it's a little bit childish, but it's super fun to be able to drive a Defender around the parking lot or around the building in this state. It just shows how tough these things can be, is that you can take them halfway apart and they're still gonna go. So this is just a little bit of fun. And we always forget to ask people to like, subscribe, comment on these videos or whatever. Mostly we just want to know what you're thinking, and if these videos and advice is helpful, or if you have questions that you want us to cover in future videos. So feel free to do that now or later, or whenever you feel like it. We're based in Minnesota and we drive our Defenders year round, and one of the things that we tell people is just wash your chassis. Get in there with a power washer, either in one of those coin operated places, or get one yourself, because one, it's satisfying, as you can see. It's even more satisfying in slow motion to watch that mud, dirt, grime, salt get washed away. You do this a few times a year and that chassis is going to last forever. And make sure you pressure wash other areas such as the engine bay or the fuel tank, because this can hold moisture up against that steel fuel tank and create holes in it, rust holes, or along the seam it will crack, and as soon as you fill it up all the way, it's going to leak all over the ground, create a mess, and it's not really a fun project to replace. Brendan's currently pressure washing the seat box cross member, which a lot of people, you can't see very well from on top, and even from underneath you can't. But that's where a lot of the dirt will get up in there, and a standard wash isn't going to take care of it. So make sure you get up in this area. And the Defender chassis has all these tiny little holes all throughout it. It's a great way to get that pressure washer in there and get the dirt to kind of flow out the bottom like you see here. It's also a great way to seal it with a wax oil or a cavity wax after you've done this, which seals it on the inside so you don't have any rust issues starting where you can't see it. Getting all that stuff out of there, a pressure washer is great, steam cleaner is even better. Let it dry thoroughly, and then do kind of an inner cavity wax or oil, depending on the climate that you're in, because some of the waxes can harden in cold climates like Minnesota and crack, and defeats the purpose. In addition to the chassis, it's good to get up underneath the rear tub, because these cross braces here are made out of steel, whereas most of the rest of it is made out of aluminum. So you get a couple of things happening, is that the two dissimilar metals meeting will create a corrosion, but then also if that steel is touching the chassis, or if the protective padding has worn away, that can rust really quickly, and that's a painful repair to take on. One of the first things we do when we start a project is we get out a couple cans of degreaser or some spray degreaser, and we get all that oil and dirt and grime out of the mechanical components. Primarily, it's just easier to work on. But two is, it's easier for us to spot leaks or problem areas that we didn't see before. Is it a clean engine, a clean transfer case, gearbox, etc.? It's a lot easier to identify those oil leaks or seepages in the process. Well, this is the area where I actually grab the pressure washer myself, because I find it very satisfying to watch the dirt. But I wanted to show kind of some of these critical areas where mud and dirt gets stuck. Up in those shock turret towers, mud will get caked up into there. So try to get your pressure washer in those areas, as well as the front part of the chassis. There's some nice easy access holes. It's a lot easier when you're not trying to film at the same time. But get the water in there and you'll see the mud pour out, and keep running it and run it until it turns clear. And even then, do it again, because the mud will settle back in, and you can kick it out again pretty easily, and that'll help preserve that. Now, we know this didn't cover every aspect of preserving your chassis, but hopefully it gives you a better idea of what to look for, whether or not you're a Defender owner now or you're just new to it. And then, of course, when you're done, take a victory lap and help air dry that chassis, get all that water out of there. And whether or not, your Defender is like this or fully drivable, it doesn't matter.
Where's the other side cutter?